Don Davy. Gotta read this one. As you know, I submitted an application last month for the vacant seat on City Council. During that process, a good friend submitted a letter of recommendation on my behalf via email to the city clerk. My friend, Mrs. Julie Israel, is very involved with volunteer activities at Holy Cross School and with whom I've worked on many projects over the past 4 years. Projects that benefit the school we pay tuition for our children to attend and the entire student body. The afternoon following the council meeting on September 19th, Mayor Tesh sent an email to my friend. She didn't indicate that she was anything other than a parishioner, as Mrs. Tesh is a member of Our Lady of the River Parish. She stated she wanted to discuss her letter of support and asked in which capacity Mrs. Israel was involved with Holy Cross. My friend was surprised why a parishioner would ask in what capacity she works in the school her 5 children attend over an issue that did not involve the parish. Mrs. Israel lives in New Haven, and as such wouldn't have an interest in the City of Algonac's council. But she questioned why a member of Our Lady on the River Parish would have an email that was sent to the city clerk of Algonac. Mrs. Israel did not know when she received that email that the parishioner making inquiries was the mayor of Algonac. On the same day, Mrs. Tesh called Holy Cross School after staff had gone for the day and left a message. She again identified herself solely as a parishioner. She asked to have Mrs. Israel return her call. Mrs. Israel was informed of this call the next morning in an email from the school secretary. This additional contact caused Mrs. Israel to be concerned because by then she was aware of Mrs. Tesh's title in Algonac. I apologize for her having to spend time on this, all from one letter of support from a friend. Mrs. Israel replied to her email on September 21st, and the reply was also CC'd to the city clerk, as that was where her original letter of support was sent. I state here at this podium that there has been one instance where I mentioned Mrs. Tesh as it relates to Holy Cross. That was to explain to my then 7-year-old why the lady he recognized from Mass on Friday, who was a Eucharist minister the day of his profession of faith, who was standing behind us while we sat at a table during a concert in the park, called the police when we weren't doing anything wrong. I explained that she just didn't think that we were supposed to have a table there, so that's why we put the table away. Council does not respond to public comments, and Mrs. Tesh is not here, but I will ask just the same. What discussion would Mrs. Tesh possibly need to have with anyone supporting me for a vacant council seat? Why would she, for any reason, need to know in what capacity Mrs. Israel's involvement at the school is where I volunteer? Why would she inquire about me at all the day after that council seat was filled? Why would she address herself as a parishioner in making those inquiries when she had Mrs. Israel's email only as a member of this council, not as a member of Our Lady on the River Parish? Mrs. Tesh toured the school last Friday and was introduced to Mrs. Israel while Mrs. Israel was volunteering in the library. She was then introduced as a mayor of Algonac, and Mrs. Israel was just introduced as Julie. Mrs. Tesh then asked her what her last name was. She did not acknowledge any email exchange between the two or calling school to speak with Mrs. Israel. I stood at this podium before pointing out that the unprofessional conduct that occurs at council table and the effect that that behavior has had on the city. The mayor has now taken that conduct beyond this table to a resident of this city, a resident of another municipality, and to the school where our children attend. I was not running an election. I submitted an application for a vacant seat on council. That vacancy was filled the evening before Mrs. Tesh's inquiry into my volunteers' activities at the school where my child attends. I am not now, or will be in the foreseeable future, seeking a position on council or on any board or committee, nor was I when the mayor made her inquiries. If this conduct is condoned by council, why would anyone answer the call to be involved? There are provisions in the city charter that allows council to call for an investigation into another member's conduct. The charter also states that the member whose conduct is under investigation does not have the ability to vote on that issue. I have asked before, I am now demanding, as a resident that you have sworn to represent, for an investigation of Mrs. Tesh's conduct to determine if she has the ability as mayor to represent the city with the integrity that we expect from an elected official. Your sworn duty
Pardon
is to
me.
put the best.
Time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you.